Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. This past Friday the 13th, there was another horrible massacre in Paris, and I believe it was perpetrated by the Illuminati, just as they perpetrated the Charlie Hebdo massacre back on January 7th. And of course, they do these false flags in order to bring about their one world government. Because the governments respond by restricting the citizens, by putting up roadblocks, by asking for IDs, for bringing out SWAT teams and the military and so on. And this is exactly leading to the reign of the Antichrist. Now, I predicted last December here on YouTube, I did 3 videos telling you that there would be 2 false flags in 2015. And I told you that they were predicted in 2 iPad commercials. And I also said they would feature the number 815. Now, before I give you my proofs that this latest massacre was masterminded by the Illuminati, let's review the Charlie Hebdo massacre, which was predicted in the iPad commercial called Your Verse. And one of the most important scenes in that commercial is this iPad where we see the 2 names, Frank and Charles. Of course, that indicated Charlie Hebdo and France. And also, on that iPad was the phrase, "If the mouth offends, sometimes a hand is needed to cover it." Obviously a threat to anyone in the know not to spill the beans. And also in that commercial, we saw this horrible image of a pregnant woman giving birth. And of course, she's naked. The 2 hills on either side represent her thighs. And we see in the lower center a stick figure, and I believe that is the Antichrist. In other words, the purpose of all of these false flags, all of this chaos, all of this death and destruction, this murder and mayhem, is to bring in the worst person who ever lived, and that is the Antichrist as our leader of the world. That's who they want. And this iPad commercial also showed 2 false flags in this image, the sun showing an explosive type event, and the smoke to the right of that showing another smoky event. And I think we saw those fulfilled with the Charlie Hebdo and the Eagles of Death metal massacres. And let me prove to you that this Charlie Hebdo massacre was predicted ahead of time, and the Illuminati were behind it, and they like to leave their trademarks behind. And as I said, as I predicted, the number 815 would be associated with it. And maybe you remember this image of the getaway car being hauled away by a crane, and the number on the crane, if you take a close look, is 815. And if you look at the license plate on the getaway car, it is 815 backwards. In other words, 518. None of this is accidental. This is how they leave their calling cards. And in fact, this whole event of hauling away this car was staged. Quite a few people have noted that the car in this image has black side mirrors, whereas the actual getaway car had silver mirrors. So now let's take a look at the new iPad commercial called Changes in the Air, and how that predicted this latest massacre of the Eagles of the Death Metal concert, where over 100 people were massacred. In the first scene, we see this military truck going through the desert. And I know at the time, you subscribers, and we tried to figure out what the numbers meant on the back of this truck. And I still don't think there's any significance to that. Maybe you can take a look and see what you think. We now know that there was a significance to the 2 words OUEST and NOR, because that is French. Those are the French words for west and north. Now, I'm not sure where Paris fits in there. Paris is in the north of France, but it's really more towards the center than the northwest. So that may not indicate the location. Now, one of the very first scenes in this iPad commercial called Changes in the Air, is a rock concert. And I don't think that's accidental. They were telling us where this false flag event would take place. And the next most important scene is this automobile. And I discussed this a lot before last year. And I knew those numbers were significant. The number on the car is actually 78. And the 7 is covered up by the driver. But we know the number is 78 because if you look at the little box in the upper right, the two numbers appear 78. And of course, they add up to 15. So there is your first manifestation of 815 in this commercial. As it turns out, the number 78 is also very significant. And the reason is because there were 8 terrorists, at least according to ISIS. 7 of them died. 7 of the 8. It's very important that that 8th one got away because that means all of Europe is still under a threat. And that's exactly what the Illuminati want. They want to be able to set up roadblocks everywhere, ask everybody for their IDs. They want to bring in martial law. And that is the type of government we will be under, according to Bible prophecy. The 8th beast is of the 7th. I don't think that numerology is accidental either. Now, if we look at this next interesting image, it is actually of the Antichrist, as, so to speak, the back of a Norse god, I guess you could say. And the number 8 appears, and this appeared at the 15-second mark of the advertisement. Now, the next very, very important image is this one of an iPad, and we see 4 very significant numbers. And of course, 815 is very prominent at the top left. On the top right, you see the number 56, and of course that adds up to 11. That would be the month, November. Below that, we see 85. You add those integers, and you get 13. That's the day it occurred. And 815 actually gives us the year, because according to European figuring, 2015 is 815. And in the military, the way they tell time, 2015 can mean the same as 815. In other words, this iPad commercial is telling us the day, the month, and the year of last Friday's terror attack in Paris. This is not accidental. Now, I'm not sure what the 138 stands for. I suspect it is the number of people they planned to kill. As of today, the death toll is 129, but there are many others in critical condition. They may achieve their goal of 138, or it may mean something else. Let me know your suggestions. Following that image, we see another picture of a rock concert, in other words, guitars, and I probably should have figured out ahead of time that they would be targeting a rock concert. After this, we see a very fascinating image of an eagle. Of course, the band that was playing was Eagles of Death Metal. It's interesting that this image is shown as a tattoo. Of course, that's very similar to the mark of the beast. Following that image, in this iPad commercial, we see a pumpkin being dropped on a target. Obviously, a very explosive type event. I'm sure that symbolizes the explosions at the rock concert. Then we see what looks like 4 hoodlums going through a tunnel with a lot of graffiti on either side. That may specifically refer to a place in Paris, I'm not sure. Then we see a whole bunch of skeletons, and of course the meaning of that is fairly obvious. And we see a skeleton up close. This commercial obviously showed a lot of violence. They knew what they were doing when they made this. It certainly is not to sell iPads. This was to give a prediction of this horrific false flag event in Paris this past Friday. And here is another image of a orange smoky fire. I'm sure that is very significant. Then we see another picture of this automobile. The automobile is shown 3 times. That's also very important. Don't forget that 7, 8 on the side of the car. That, of course, is very significant, as it turns out. And what would be an iPad commercial without the all-seeing eye? This was their way of telling us that this is indeed a prophecy from the Illuminati, and we should have figured it out. I suspect I did not say enough rosaries. Mary could have opened my eyes totally instead of just halfway, and I could have figured out all of this event ahead of time, and maybe you in my audience did not say enough rosaries. That is how we are ultimately going to defeat this one world system. Following the Illuminati triangle, we see another third image of a rock concert. It's pretty obvious what this commercial was all about. And then we see a close-up of the 78 automobile, and this is certainly obvious. We see the passenger not only sticking his tongue, giving homage to the demon goddess Kali, but also giving us the satanic horns. And the question we have to ask ourselves is not that this is an Illuminati false flag event this past Friday, but will they perpetrate another one? And the answer is definitely. These false flags are going to get worse until they get their way. And the Illuminati are not shy. They don't mind showing us these things. And the reason they don't mind showing us is they know we can't do anything about it. That will change. I warn you people supporting the one world government, you will lose as soon as enough people start paying homage to the Queen of Heaven, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the one who was prophesied way back in Genesis 3:15 to crush Satan. And that will be your fate also. And if you would like to know more information about my ministry, visit my thirdeaglemedia.com website.